Hello Year 5s, thank you for joining me for my first ever YouTube video. I hope you and your families are well and you didn't eat as much chocolate as I did over the Easter. This video is mostly for Year 5s as we're continuing a book that we've been doing in class, and just some of the themes that are discussed are for a slightly more mature audience. Year 3s and 4s, you're going to be reading this book anyway when you get to Year 5, so you might not want any spoilers. And obviously Year 6, you're more than welcome to listen again if you really enjoyed the book that we did last year. So we are going to be continuing with The Breadwinner. I've chosen to start at chapter 5 just because it was very weird at the end of term where some children were in, some children were out. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of where we're up to. So obviously Pavana and her family are living in Afghanistan under the Taliban's rule. Usually Pavana would go out every day with her father to the market because her father would only have only has one leg, so she's been helping him. But ordinarily in our story, the women aren't seen very much at all outdoors. Now at some point in our story, the father gets taken away by the Taliban, and so it's just Pavana, her mum, and her sister Nuria, and I think their other baby brother as well. So it's becoming quite difficult for them. So the day after her father was taken, Pavana and mother decided that they were going to go to the prison where he was taken and were going to try to get him back. But whilst they were there, it just didn't go too well for them, and now they're in a lot of pain back at home after their long journey, and so now they've got to try and survive without father there. They didn't bring father back. So we're going to start with chapter 5, and obviously you can listen to this, rewatch this as many times as you want. And then your task for today is on the homework sheet, the home learning sheet that will have been uploaded on the website. So, chapter 5. It was strange to be in the marketplace without father. Pavana almost expected to see him in their usual place, sitting on the blanket, reading and writing with his customers' letters. Women were not allowed to go into the shops. Men were supposed to do all the shopping. But if women did it, they had to stand outside and call in for what they needed. Pavana had seen shopkeepers beaten for serving women inside their shops. Pavana wasn't sure if she would be considered a woman. On the one hand, if she behaved like one and stood outside the shop and called in her order, she could get in trouble for not wearing a burqa. On the other hand, if she went into the shop, she could get in trouble for not acting like a woman. She put off her decision by buying the naan first. The baker's stall opened onto the street. Pavana pulled her chador more tightly around her face so that only her eyes were showing. She held up 10 fingers, 10 loaves of naan. A pile of naan was already baked, but she had to wait a little while for 4 more loaves to be flipped out of the oven. The attendant wrapped the bread in a piece of newspaper and handed it to Pavana. She paid without looking up. The bread was still warm. It smelled so good. The wonderful smell reminded Pavana how hungry she was. She could have swallowed a whole loaf in one gulp. The fruit and vegetable stand was next. Before she had time to make a selection, a voice behind her shouted, "What are you doing in the street dressed like that?" Pavana wheeled round to see a Talib staring at her, anger in his eyes and a stick in his hand. "You must be covered up. Who is your father? Who is your husband? They'll be punished for letting you walk the street like that." The soldier raised his arm and brought the stick down on Pavana's shoulder. Pavana didn't even feel it. Punish her father, would they? "Stop hitting me!" she yelled. The Talib was so surprised, he held still for a moment. Pavana saw him pause, and she started to run. She knocked over a pile of turnips at the vegetable stand, and they went rolling all over the street. Clutching the still warm naan to her chest, Pavana kept running, her sandals slapping against the pavement. She didn't care if people were staring at her. All she wanted was to get as far away from the soldier as she could, as fast as her legs could carry her. She was so anxious to get home. She ran right into a woman carrying a child. "Is that Pavana?" Pavana tried to get away, but the woman had a firm grip on her arm. "Is that Pavana? What kind of a way is that to carry Nan?" The voice behind the burqa was familiar, but Pavana couldn't remember who it belonged to. "Speak up, girl. Don't stand there with your mouth open as though you were a fish in the market. Speak up." "Mrs. Vera?" "Oh, that's right. My face is covered. I keep forgetting. Now, why are you running? And why are you crushing that perfectly good bread?" Pavana started to cry. "The Taliban, one of the soldiers, he was chasing me." "Dry your eyes." Under such a circumstance, running was a very sensible thing to do. I always thought you had the makings of a sensible girl, and you've proven me just right. Good for you. You've outrun the Taliban. Where are you going with all that bread?" "Home. I'm almost there." "We'll go together. I've been meaning to call on your mother for some time. We need a magazine, and your mother is just the person to get it going for us." "Mother doesn't write anymore, and I don't think she'll want the company." "Nonsense. Let's go." Mrs. Vera had been in the Afghans Women's Union with Mother. She was so sure Mother wouldn't mind her dropping in that Pavana obediently led the way. "And stop squeezing that bread! It's not going to suddenly jump out of your arms." When they were almost at the top step, Pavana turned to Mrs. Vera. "About Mother. She's not been well." "Then it's a good thing I stopped by to take care of her." Pavana gave up. They reached the apartment door and went inside. Nuria saw only Pavana at first. She took the naan from her. "Is this all you've bought? Where's the rice? Where's the tea? How are we supposed to manage with just this?" "Don't be too hard on her. She was chased out of the market before she could complete her shopping." Mrs. Vera stepped into the room and took off her burqa. "Mrs. Vera!" Nuria exclaimed. Relief washed over her face. Here was someone who could take charge, who could take some of the responsibility off her shoulders. Mrs. Vera placed the child she's been carrying down on the mat beside Ali. The two toddlers eyed each other wearily. Mrs. Vera was a tall woman. Her hair was white, but her body was strong. She'd been a physical education teacher before the Taliban made her leave her job. "What in the world is going on here?" she asked. A few quick strides, she was in the bathroom, searching out the source of the stench. "Why aren't those diapers washed?" "We're out of water," Nuria explained. "We've been afraid to go out." "You're not afraid, are you, Pavana?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Fetch the bucket, girl. Do your bit for the team. Here we go." Mrs. Vera still talked like she was out on the hockey field, urging everyone to do their best. "Where's Fatina?" she asked, as Pavana fetched the water bucket. Nuria motioned to the figure on the toshak buried under the blanket. Mother groaned and tried to huddle down even further. "She's sleeping," Nuria said. "How long's she been like this?" 4 days. "Where's your father?" "Arrested." "Ah, I see." She caught sight of Pavana holding the empty bucket. "Are you waiting for it to rain inside so your bucket will fill itself? Off you go!" Pavana went. She made 7 trips. Mrs. Vera met her outside the apartment at the top of the steps and took the first 2 full buckets from her, emptied them inside and brought back the empty bucket. "We're getting your mother cleaned up and she doesn't need another pair of eyes on her." After that, Pavana carried the water inside to the water tank as usual. Mrs. Vera had gotten up and washed. Mother didn't seem to notice Pavana. She kept hauling water. Her arms were sore, and the blisters on her feet started to bleed again, but she didn't think about that. She fetched water because her family needed it, because her father would have expected her to. Now that Mrs. Vera was there and her mother was up, things were going to get easier, and she would do her part. Out the door, down the steps, down the street to the tap, then back again, stopping now and then to rest and change carrying arms. After the 7th trip, Mrs. Vera stopped her. "You filled the tank and the wash bin, and there's a full bucket to spare. That's enough for now." Pavana was dizzy from doing all the exercise with no food and nothing to drink. She wanted some water right away. What are you doing? Noria asked as Pavana filled a cup up from the tank. You know it has to be boiled first. Unboiled water made you sick, but Pavana was so thirsty that she didn't care. She wanted to drink and raised the cup to her lips. Nuria snatched it from her hands. You are the stupidest girl in all of the world. All we need now is for you to get sick. How could anyone so stupid end up as my sister? That's no way to keep up team spirit, Mrs. Vera said. Nuria, why don't you get the little ones washed for dinner? Use cold water. We'll let this first batch of boiled water be for drinking. Pavana went out into the larger room and sat down. Mother was sitting up. She'd put on clean clothes. Her hair was brushed and tied back. She looked more like Mother, although she seemed very tired. It felt like an eternity before Mrs. Vera handed Pavana a cup of plain boiled water. Be careful, it's very hot. As soon as she could, she drank the water, got another cupful, and drank that too. Mrs. Vera and her granddaughter stayed at night. As Pavana drifted off to sleep, she heard her, Nuria, and Mother talking quietly together. Mrs. Vera told them about Pavana's brush with the Taliban. The last thing she heard before she fell asleep was Mrs. Vera saying, I guess we'll have to think of something else. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 5. So I think what we've got down for you today is we want you to kind of come up with a plan, or I think it's advice, isn't it, as to what do you think the family should do next. So have there been any clues previously to this, if you remember the text, that might help you to predict what you think might happen next? And also, we had a few questions previously about what does the breadwinner actually mean. So maybe I should have put this as a vocabulary rad for this week, but either way, have a think. The breadwinner, what does that itself mean, and what might that mean in terms of the text? Either way, hope you enjoyed, and I will come back with another chapter for you tomorrow.